Welcome to this explainer. I'm thrilled you're here. This was made by the team at Forge College. First off, a massive congratulations. If you're tuning in, it means you successfully survived your recent capstone security audit. You've analyzed the call graphs, you've squinted at symbolic execution traces, and you've found the hazards. But spotting bugs, that's really only step one. Today, we're diving into material from the Foundry by Forge College, focusing on an introduction to security patterns. We're going to transition from simply finding those dangerous hazards to actively fixing them through structural design.
Here is a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll go from audit to action, introduce the room and door metaphor, cover checks, effects, interactions, the principle of least privilege, building fail-safe techniques, and finally, securing the token vault.
All right, part one, from audit to action, bridging that gap from detection to mitigation. So you've found the vulnerabilities in the capstone. Fantastic. But now how do you actually fix them? This is a massive, incredibly common point of frustration for developers. Look, static analysis is great, right? It tells you exactly where a hazard is hiding. It'll flag that dangerous external call or that logic error, but staring at a red warning flag doesn't magically give you the concrete engineering steps you need to make the code safe.
The curriculum is really clear here. We have to define our terms first. So what exactly is a security pattern? Well, it's a recurring structural decision that addresses a recurring failure mode in smart contracts. We're not just talking about academic checklists that you glance at once and forget. These are practical, repeatable engineering moves. They dictate exactly what each pattern prevents, how it fundamentally alters your function structure, and crucially, what trade-offs you have to accept to lower your overall risk.
Moving right along to Section 2, the room and door metaphor. Thinking of contracts as state machines.
Think of a smart contract as a building made up of rooms connected by doors. Every door has locks, which act as your checks. Inside, you have switches, which are your internal state updates. And you have windows, representing your external calls. A vulnerable state? Well, it's basically like throwing open a window to shout at your neighbor while you're still in the middle of flipping the room's light switches. Honestly, it's like opening the window before you've even finished putting your pants on. It's absurd, and it's dangerous. A secure state means you verify the locks first, you flip all your internal switches, and only then do you open the window to interact with the outside world.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, checks, effects, interactions, better known as the CEI pattern. Here is exactly how this temporal ordering works in your code. Step 1 is the check. You verify the keys at the door. Does the caller have the right balance? Are they even authorized? Step 2 is the effect. You flip the internal state switches, decrease the balance, update your accounting. And step 3 is the interaction. You open the external window to make that external token transfer. Listen closely on this one. You must never, ever interact with the outside world before your internal state is completely 100% settled.
Because if you mess up that order, you're rolling out the red carpet for reentrancy. This is an exploit where an external call interrupts your state changes, which allows for repeated actions. Going back to our house metaphor, reentrancy is what happens when a malicious actor climbs right back through that open window while your internal switches are still vulnerable mid-flip. This causes a time of check to time of use bug. They end up draining your funds because your internal balance hasn't actually been updated yet. CEI simply slams that window shut until all the switches are safely flipped.
Okay, on to Section 4, the principle of least privilege, shrinking the blast radius. The golden rule here is pretty simple. Don't give a skeleton key to the janitor. This entire pattern is about access control. If you've got a God mode owner role in your code that can do literally everything, from pausing the contract to draining all the funds, that is a skeleton key. And if that one key is compromised, your whole building burns to the ground. In fact, students often learn this the hard way during mock audits at Forge College, watching their entire protocol get wrecked because their God mode key got phished. You absolutely have to minimize the capabilities assigned to any single account to shrink that blast radius.
Section 5, building fail-safe techniques, or as we like to call it, installing emergency deadbolts.
Let's be real. Sometimes, despite your absolute best efforts, things go catastrophically wrong. That's exactly why we install mechanical guards, emergency deadbolts to save the contract. We're talking about pausability, acting as circuit breakers to freeze the protocol, mutexes, which are reentrancy locks to prevent nested calls, even if you accidentally mess up your CEI ordering, and invariant asserts for strict state verification. Think of these as your controlled escape hatches for those rare, unpredictable failure states.
Let's demystify that last one for a second. An invariant is simply a condition or a rule that must always hold true. Think of it as a mathematical sensor inside the room. If that sensor detects something weird, say tokens magically appearing out of thin air, it instantly triggers those emergency deadbolts and reverse the transaction completely.
Now, we can build all of this into a quick diagnostic cheat sheet, which is super helpful for mapping audit findings directly to code changes. If your failure mechanism is reentrancy, you apply the CEI pattern. The trade-off? You might have to split up your functions. If the risk is privilege escalation, you apply least privilege, though that introduces a bit of access control overhead. And if the risk is unexpected state errors, you drop in fail-safes, which can add some operational complexity. Every structural fix comes with a trade-off, but hey, it is absolutely always better than getting hacked.
Finally, Section 6, Securing the Token Vault. Let's see these patterns in practice.
Applying CEI breaks our vault's withdrawal into exactly 3 strict phases. First up, the require statement, checking that the caller actually has a sufficient balance. Second, we deduct that balance from our internal accounting. Third, and only third, we execute the external token transfer. 3 phases, strictly ordered, no exceptions.
Next, we bring in least privilege. We're going to replace that dangerous unrestricted single-owner role with fine-grained roles. We create a withdraw admin role just for emergency recovery and a completely separate pauser role for toggling our circuit breakers. Then we lock those highly sensitive roles behind a multisig or a time lock. By taking that skeleton key and splitting it into smaller keys that require multiple signers, we drastically shrink the blast radius if one key gets compromised.
And for the final touch, we add our failsafe. We drop an invariant check right at the very end of the function, asserting that the total accounting perfectly equals the sum of all individual balances. This is our deadbolt. If the math doesn't perfectly align after a withdrawal, this sensor trips and instantly reverts the entire transaction. The system never proceeds in a corrupted state.
To wrap this all up, keep this quote from the material in your head. A smart contract is only as secure as its weakest door. Make absolutely sure your locks are checked, your switches are flipped, and only then open your windows. To really master these real-world engineering moves, I highly encourage you to visit forge.college to explore this curriculum and dive into other Web3 topics. This explainer was brought to you by Forge College. Until next time, ask yourself, are your digital doors actually locked or are they just closed? I'll see you in the next explainer.